Hello, it's time for part 2. Remember, I called this part Entreat. I call it Entreat because, again, we've broken the development, the history, if you will, of interpersonal relationships from a symbolic interaction point of view down into 5 steps: meet, entreat, complete, compete, and defeat, in order to coalesce the various different step-by-step pyramid models where you go from relatively undefined up to clearly defined and then back down to undefined, all into one area so that we can discuss them conversationally. You can read about the specifics in the textbook. You should read about the specifics in the textbook. But I'm here now just to sort of give you a general overview of what they're about from more of a conversational perspective. So, in the meet phase, the transition is that we've gone through a lot of the like squishy stuff, a lot of the embarrassing stuff. You all know how it is. You've all been there. If you have a person, the average person who is uncomfortable when they start to try to meet other people, and really, who isn't? If it's somebody that doesn't have some obvious overarching advantage going into an attraction situation, if the person's not like extraordinarily good looking or amazingly competent or famous or really smart, or has a really good fashion sense or a point of view that makes them attractive to other people, if the person generally lacks any kind of charisma, they're going to do some things that might get a little awkward. They're going to go back to that stage where if you can't be exceptional, you have to try to seem exceptional. So I don't know, what would be a good example? They'll try affectations to make themselves set apart. Maybe a guy will wear a bow tie, even though bow ties aren't really fashionable right now. If he's really bold or really desperate, he might throw on a pair of suspenders too, and try to show you that, hey, he's dressed up. He knows what's appropriate, but he puts his own little spin on it. Well, by the time you get through the meet stage, by the time you've worked through, remember Berger talked about uncertainty reduction. You know what the rules are. You know what the expectations are. You've gotten good at having a conversation. You've gotten good at developing the things that you can talk about, the things that maybe you shouldn't talk about, and how to talk about them. But then you realize that it's the talk itself that you're really motivated by. It's the being with that person. And it's not just the conversation, it's the aura of the conversation. It's the opportunity to have conversation and to create events and new attitudes and new experiences with that person in whatever form they take. That motivates you. In the entreat stage, you're confident enough that the person obviously recognizes that there is something to you. Then you start to get comfortable with the person. You don't want to get too comfortable. But you can trade in your bow tie for, say, your beer tie. You don't button your top button. You throw on a casual jacket instead of a suit. You know, that kind of stuff. I don't know. So at any rate, in the entreat phase, when you moved on from the meet phase, it's really about beginning to formalize, beginning to recognize that there is a potential we involved here. All right, we can think of it in 3 primary steps. The first of which is to recognize that you've overcome that initial uncertainty. All right. That you've established informal rules for interaction, and that you've established a set of shared expectations for future interaction. You look forward to seeing each other again and again and again. So in the entreat stage, you begin to start to finalize the whole step of what we can refer to as formalizing the us. You're formalizing this notion that there could be an us to which we can refer, instead of us just being the two of us informally together at individual times. See, we're talking now about 2 individual atoms hanging out together. in the same space, in the same time, revolving around each other. We're starting to think about the bonding process, the process by which that atom becomes a molecule. Now, generally, the form that that takes is by increased commitment to three dynamics that we've already talked about in class, dynamics that we've already discussed and we know about in great detail, but we could talk about a little bit more here. Of course, those dynamics are self-disclosure, small talk ceases to be small talk and starts to become talk. When you share something with someone in this stage, in the entreat stage, you're sharing with them stuff that maybe you wouldn't say to somebody else. Or maybe you wouldn't say to somebody who wasn't already a close friend or a family member. And just by virtue of sharing something with somebody like that they recognize, it's the actual sharing itself rather than the content that makes it valuable, because this person sees, this person recognizes that this is not just an extension of private information from you to them. This is your entreaty to them. Of course, the appropriate thing to do is maybe not at that particular moment. You don't want to say, oh, I have a secret too. But to accept willingly and enthusiastically the person's willingness to do that, and at some future time to remember that with regard to all of these things, but especially self-disclosure, there has to be an equal give and take. Then obviously intimacy, which is the next one. The rate at which this happens, I don't know. But again, it's something that intimacy is not just defined in the way that we're normally thinking about it. Intimacy is defined as closeness, a lack of defensiveness, not the kind of defensiveness that we'll talk about in a moment that when we talk about trust. Intimacy is a clear and honest sense that the person has you in their heart, that the person that you're safe with this person, that you're emotionally safe with this person, that you mean something to that person, and that they're not looking to exploit you or to do you harm. Now when we get to trust, trust I think is maybe more, this might be a gross oversimplification, but remember this is the overview. You can go read the book about these things and get a lot more specific answers. But I like to think of trust more as the mental equivalent of emotional intimacy. Yes, trust has an emotional equivalent, but we tend to think of trust as something that we recognize. You say, I trust you. You don't say, I intimate you. Trust is more of a contract. It's more of not a verbal recognition, but a mental, intellectual recognition that there is an exchange of feelings here and that people recognize that. So in terms of the entreat stage, a good way to think about it in terms of process is that our do with. What do you want to do? You want to do something tonight? Let's go to the movies. Let's have dinner. Whatever we do, I want to do something with you. In the entreat stage, as the entreat stage starts to morph into the complete stage, you see do with start to become or morph into have with. All right? You start to think of the things that you do generating a record. You start to think of the things that you do together generating a set of footprints that you will emotionally and intellectually, for good or ill, be able to go back over for the rest of your lives. So you're also starting to accrue value. Going to see the movie together, yeah, you do with. Now you can both say that you've seen the movie, but you also have the together. You know, what happened when I got scared, what happened when it got mushy, that kind of stuff. That stuff that's gonna supersede the moment. That stuff that's gonna supersede the event itself and become part of your shared personal history. That's the difference between do with and have with, which is out of time. Now we're at the precipice of the next step, where we formalize that have and actually turn it into something other than shared history. We take the accumulation of value that we have generated and we put that into the creation of a whole new form of being.